From the 7 News. My name's Jessica Faulkner.
And I'm Alexia DeGuzimun. Eddie Mabo is an extraordinary and noble Indigenous Australian whose name echoes throughout history for challenging the accepted common law of terra nullius that Australia was uninhabited when the white settlers arrived in 1788.
It took 10 years for Eddie Mabo, along with his people, to fight their battle. The Indigenous Australians stood united as one, side by side, until on June 3rd, 1992, the High Court finally decided against terra nullius and recognised the unique connection that the Indigenous Australians and Torres Strait Islander peoples had with their land, with the passing of the Native Title Act. The Parliament reinforced this decision and acknowledged Indigenous land rights.
Mabo Day is a day of unison and equality, as it is a decision that highly impacted our nation in the past and will continue to do so in our future. It's a time to remember the great hero known as Eddie Mabo, who taught us to always stand against our rights and freedom. It has had national and international implications and can provide lessons for the future.
Now go to Nancy Drew, who is currently in Townsville, to report back to us on the wonderful occasion. Thanks, Jessica. It's the 3rd of June and citizens all around Australia are celebrating the 24th anniversary of one of the biggest decisions that have reshaped our nation. The Mabo decision, also known as Judgment Day, was not only a defining moment for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, but it's also for non-Indigenous Australians. We have a special guest here today to answer some of our questions. Special reporter and publisher, June, July and August.
Good afternoon, Nancy.
Good afternoon, June. For millions of our viewers out there, can you explain to us who is involved within one of the biggest events in our Australian history?
Yeah, sure, Nancy. Well, everyone obviously knows Eddie Mabo within the movement since it's named after him. There are also several people right by his side every step of the way. Eddie Koiki Mabo, along with Sam Reverend David Parsley, Sylvia Mafo Sally, and James Rice, all started the movement for change within Australia on 20th of May 1982, by publicly expressing their thoughts out loud and taking action for the behalf of their people, therefore challenging the state of Queensland and Commonwealth of Australia.
There was also, of course, the High Court, who was fully involved throughout the whole case and finally gave the people the news that they needed to hear.
Yes, on June 3rd, 1992, the judges of the High Court claimed that our land was not terra nullius, or land belonging to no one, when the white settlers arrived, stating that the Indigenous Australians and Torres Strait Islander people were entitled as against the whole world to possession, occupation, use and enjoyment of most of the lands of the Murray Islands. But all of the Indigenous Australians and Torres Strait Islander people and everyone who helped them fight and achieve the rights they deserve and have today all show the whole world that justice can be given to anyone who has a strong-minded leader and companions by their side.
I was very interested on what other opinions about this question is, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you. How do you think that Judgment Day relates to the present events that are occurring today?
The rural India fight was due to the government threatening the people of rural India taking away their land. I remember hearing about how 7,000 people walked by foot to New Delhi just to stand up for what was theirs, and how an 80-year-old man by the name of DeGuzimun stated, "We came with the hope that our land will be saved. If the government takes away our land, we will die of poverty." There was also the Bilan village located in Israel, whose were protesting about the violation of the Israel wall on village lands. This fight has continued for several years, much like our own Mabo case that continued for 10 years straight. This village relates to the Mabo fight in many ways, such as the struggles and heartache of families, the deaths of hundreds of people, and lastly, the amount of time it is taking for their government to listen to what the people have to say, just like how our government listened to us. Although this country has not gotten its victory yet, there is still hope for the Bilan village, just as much hope as we had on the High Court. There was and still is many cases that are still untold and viewed to public eye about land right fights, but that does not mean that we should ignore the fact that we were once those countries who went through the same rough road that we travelled through to become a better nation.
Thank you, G. I, along with I'm sure everyone else who is watching, can understand the message that you are trying to put out there. Now we have a special guest who's with our camera crew in Canberra, who will give us more information about the topic of Mabo Day. Here on Mabo Day marks the 24th anniversary of the High Court's decision to recognise native title. Here in Canberra, many of the local people have gathered to remember the man who led the fight for legal land rights, Eddie Mabo. The Mabo decision has implicated on Australia immensely. It has impacted on our nation by giving back land to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and by bringing them together with the settlers to finally unite as a stabilised country. Many of the Aboriginal peoples regained their land if they could prove that they had a spiritual connection to their land. This was difficult for some, but many succeeded. Many famous Australian icons are now recognised by native title. For example, Uluru and Wave Rock. The Mabo decision has impacted on equality and the healing of our nation to bring together a better future. This has stopped a lot of discrimination between the Indigenous Australians and the settlers. This decision has helped settlers and Indigenous Australians to come together and start the healing process, which may have led to the 2008 apology from Kevin Rudd. Many of the world events have impacted on Eddie Mabo's decision to fight for land rights, such as the Indians fighting for their land in America between the years of 1778 and 1871. The Native Americans are one of the many groups who created the movement for equal land rights across the nation. At first, the United States government only had one policy to deal with Indians. The policy was that whenever white people wanted Indians' land, tribes contained within were pushed further west in order for the land to be conquered by the white people. They could not fight because if they showed any sign of rebellion, protested, or tried to fight to defend their land, they were prosecuted. By the 1800s, almost all the eastern Indians had been moved west of the Mississippi River. They were given land in the Indian Territory in what is now known as the state of Oklahoma. The government described the Native Indians as civilized. This meant that they were labelled as too weak to cause any more trouble. Many of the Indians had agreed to follow the ways of the white people because they were too afraid to stand up for themselves. This is one of the many world events that helped create the movement and impacted dearly on Eddie Mabo to help create a better future for Australia with less discrimination, more rights, and to start the healing of a nation.
Even though many Indigenous Australians have already been given back their land, many more are still fighting for their land rights. Even though the battle between Indigenous Australians and non-Indigenous Australians occurred 24 years ago, some people still think of Indigenous Australians as second-class citizens. For example, statistics have shown from a survey in 2011 that 70% of people who are Aboriginal, academics and professional staff have experienced discrimination and racist attitudes in the workplace.
To this day, Aboriginal Australians are still not treated as equally as they deserve. For example, the Closing of the Gap report has shown how Indigenous Australians have worse health conditions compared to non-Indigenous Australians. It shows how white Australians live up to 87.1 years, while Indigenous Australians only live up to 69.1 years. This may be because Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people do not benefit from the same health services as non-Indigenous peoples. Because Oxfam Australia discovered that health services are not accessible to many and particularly remote Aboriginal communities.
I'm sure that the Mabo decision can help us create a better future for generations to come. It can help us create lessons for our upcoming future that everyone is equal no matter the colour of their skin. Therefore, discriminatory acts are not acceptable in our world, and that non-white people are not second-class citizens.
National and international implications and can prove lessons for our future, such as teaching our children lessons from right and wrong, and that discrimination goes against other cultures. They're just labels. Hence, at the end of the day, everyone is the same, and we are all the same race, skin deep. Concludes our segment for today about Mabo Day.
We'll be right back after the break.